Now we're seeing this kind of rise of technology as a driver of change. And of course, one of the big technologies that's on everybody's lips these days is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How big a deal is AI for CIA?
I think it has always been the case that the agency recognized the importance of technology to facilitate what the agency does, as well as a topic of what the agency needed to focus on.
We've done a fair amount of writing and thinking about incorporating AI. And everywhere that I go and talk to people on the Hill or even people in the community, sort of the repeated refrain of need to go faster.
And so the human mission is also human-enabled tech collection. What we need to do is collect information in different ways. It's no longer getting the piece of paper, it's getting the computer file.
Welcome to Intelligence at the Edge. My name is Chip Usher, and I am the Senior Director for Intelligence here at the Special Competitive Studies Project and a veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency. I believe we are at a pivotal moment in our nation's security. The current global order is under stress from two directions. First, there are the so-called axis of disruptors, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, that are seeking to impose their will on their neighbors and promote their authoritarian approach to governance as a viable alternative to Western-style democracy. At the same time, the pace of technological change is mind-boggling and itself acting as a catalyst for disruption and global realignment. As we speak, artificial intelligence is literally changing the way societies operate, how economies perform, and how wars are fought. Here at SESP, we are dedicated to the thesis that the existing global world order is worth preserving. The United States has many strengths that it can draw upon, but we cannot be complacent. The U.S. and our allies need to restore our sources of national competitiveness and re-examine our old traditional approaches to managing national security challenges. And this extends to the intelligence community. As I was thinking about how best to launch this podcast, I wanted my first guest to be someone who could help frame these issues and set the stage for where the U.S. intelligence community and CIA are today. There is no one better suited for this assignment than David Cohen, whose remarkable 16-year career in the IC started in 2009 when he was the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Terrorism Finance. He later served twice as CIA Deputy Director, first during the Obama administration and then again under the Biden administration. By any measure, David was an outstanding Deputy Director who both understood and advocated for CIA's mission, but also pushed the agency to adapt in response to new geostrategic dynamics and technological trends. In this first episode, David shares his perspectives on the current strategic landscape facing CIA and the IC and the impact of AI and other technologies on the business of spycraft and on ways that the agency can further adapt to maintain our country's intelligence advantage. David Cohen, welcome to Intelligence at the Edge. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks, Chip. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you very much for being our first guest.
I am honored.
When I was thinking about who we should invite, I sort of instantly thought of you for a couple of reasons. One is I really enjoyed working for you twice, but the second reason is I think you worked at one of those rare fulcrum moments in history. You started your intelligence career, if I recall correctly, back in 2009 as the Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Terrorism Finance.
Right.
You later went on to become the Undersecretary of Treasury in charge of Terrorism Finance and Intelligence.
Right.
You had a brief hiatus during the first Trump administration.
Right.
First you became the Deputy Director of CIA the first time, and then you took a break and came back again for the second stint as the Deputy Director, leaving January of this year. So you saw both the conclusion or the end of the global war on terrorism and the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the advent of whatever new era that we're in now.
Right.
Some people have described it as the renewed global rivalry or great power competition, new Cold War with China. I tend to focus on techno-economic competition with China, but also with other competitors. But how did you perceive that evolution in the national security landscape and the intelligence community's positioning. Did you perceive it was happening, and how did you react?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. It really is great to be here and to be able to do this podcast and to participate with SCSP. Look, I think that arc that you described, I perceived as it was happening. I started in 2009. Was my job as the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing was very much focused on trying to cut off money to terrorist organizations, to Al-Qaeda, and with the rise of ISIS, to ISIS and other terrorist organizations. But that was also a dominant theme in the national security community at the time, was as you say, the global war on terror, the sort of whole of government effort to address the terrorist threat. I'd say over the 15 years or 16 years that I served in government with that 4-year hiatus, the prevalence of terrorism as a topic in the national security conversation declined. It by no means went away, however, and it remained an important topic all the way through. And as we pivoted to great power competition, I actually like the way you described it. I think it is great. It's sort of great state rivalry is how I think about it, and I can talk about that more. But it is that has become sort of the dominant theme now in the national security community, is the rivalry between the U.S. and China in particular, but also with Russia, although a declining power, still a very important and obviously disruptive power. But that has become the principal focus of the national security community. Terrorism has declined as a result. It remains an important issue. And the other issue that has really gained prominence is technology. The importance of technology as a part of how a nation state projects power, its economics, its military, its influence, but also an element of national power unto itself. And that has become, I think, at least the way that I thought about the national security landscape and what the agency was focused on, what it needed to do to help the policy community address the world as we find it. Understanding technology became an increasingly important aspect.
I entirely agree. And, thinking back of the history of the intelligence community, formed in the Second World War in response to Pearl Harbor, we needed to have an intelligence service. We needed to have a community, sort of forged then in the Cold War. But at every turn, it seemed like it was crisis or real or physical, the threat of physical threats that kind of galvanized change, even 9/11, right? We
for sure
instantly pivoted to become, at CIA, the world's premier counterterrorism organization almost overnight. Now we're seeing this kind of rise of technology as a driver of change. When you and Director Burns were there at the CIA, you instituted several reforms to kind of capture this moment. Can you talk a little bit about what you did?
Sure, but let me actually go back in time.
Go ahead.
And back to really the founding of the agency, and then scroll forward to 1963 when the Directorate of Science and Technology was created. And the agency has had this love affair with technology, going back to the beginning, to the Corona spy satellites, to the U-2 A-12 spy plane, to the lithium-ion battery was created at the agency. So I think it has always been the case that the agency recognized the importance of technology to facilitate what the agency does, as well as a topic of what the agency needed to focus on. Although I think that has become more important in recent years. But in my tenure, I joined the agency in early 2015, just as the strategic modernization was being rolled out. And one of the really important aspects of that was the creation of the first new directorate in several decades in the agency, the Directorate of Digital Innovation, which Director Brennan at the time, I think, foresaw the importance of focusing the agency's efforts on digital technology. And so we created DDI in 2015. Scroll forward, as you noted, in 2021 with Director Burns. One of the first things that we did when we came in was sort of take stock. We did a strategic review of the agency. And one of the things that we found as part of that review was the need to sort of take another step forward in how we were approaching technology. So we created the position for the first time of a chief technology officer, brought in somebody who had experience both in government and in Silicon Valley.
This is Nan Mulkandani.
Yeah, Nan Mulkandani, who was a force of nature who came into the agency, terrific guy, to help us think more strategically and more holistically about technology, both as a topic for us to focus on, as well as an accelerant for our own intelligence efforts. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But the other thing that we did at that time was created a new mission center, the Transnational Technology Mission Center, which was designed to really, again, sort of focus the agency's efforts, particularly its relationship with the private sector, the domestic private sector, which is, we've always had a very close relationship with the agency, but even more so as we are in this era where technology is increasingly important in national security. That relationship between the agency and the private sector is itself more important.
So, David, during my time at the agency, one of the aspects of the agency's work that I think is one of the unheralded but very, very important and powerful crown jewels of what the agency does is managing foreign intelligence relationships. Other agencies also have their counterpart relationships, but CIA is the executive agent for it across the IC, and it's really central to a lot of what the agency does. One of the things that kind of worries me going forward is as we kind of climb this technology ladder and get better and better with AI or some of these other technologies, are we going to be kind of creating a technology gap with some of our liaison partners? And how significant will that be? And is there anything that we need to be doing to address it?
Well, I mean, you're 100% right. The ability of the agency to do its job and do its job well is enhanced by its liaison relationships around the world. The agency is a very powerful institution, but it could not do anything close to what it is called upon to do and what it does without this network of relationships from the Five Eyes, but much beyond the Five Eyes. Tending to those relationships is an important part of what the agency does. And as technology becomes an increasingly important part, both of the intelligence focus and what we're collecting on and analyzing, as well as how we go about doing our business, we're going to need to also infuse that into these liaison relationships. We have many partners who themselves have great technical capability and, frankly, can share with us some of what they've developed, just as we can share with them.
And of course, one of the big technologies that's on everybody's lips these days is artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
How big a deal is AI for CIA? My personal view is it's a huge deal, right? And I think in ways that both the agency currently understands and appreciates, and maybe even some ways that they don't fully understand or want to accept. But I think it's going to be transformative for the business of intelligence. How do you see it?
Yeah, and I think it is incredibly important both for the business of intelligence and sort of how the agency does its work, as well as what the agency needs to focus on. So let me talk first about how the agency does its work.
Okay.
The agency, in some respects, is like any other big business. It's got, it is essentially a Fortune 100 company with lots of business operations, lots of personnel, lots of facilities, people overseas. So just running an organization like the agency, like running any other Fortune 100 company, if you're not incorporating AI into the day-to-day of the operations of your business or of your agency, you're missing an enormous chance to do things more efficiently, less expensively, all the rest. So I think we sometimes forget about that as the importance of AI to the agency, but it's actually a really important thing because we are, custodians of the public's money. We should be doing things efficiently. We should be doing things better. So that's one aspect. But the sort of the sexier aspect of it is how we use AI to do our collection mission, our analytic mission, our support mission. And I think AI is already being used in important ways and has lots of opportunities. So, analytically, one of the things that the agency is responsible for is open source. Mm-hmm. We are the
open source enterprise.
The open source enterprise. It is the center of the open source effort for the entire intelligence community. Several years ago, the agency created a tool to essentially make use of what is available out in the open source for analysts. It goes through, scrapes a whole bunch of information every day, summarizes it, presents new ideas for analysts to think about. At the time, it was described, I think, by folks at Microsoft as sort of the leading tool that they had seen for this. That was 2 years ago. There's been a lot of evolution since then, but we were even, relatively early in the sort of generative AI experience, bringing AI into the agency in the open source enterprise. Within the DA, more generally, the Directorate of Analysis, we've been experimenting with how to use AI for ideation, for summarization, for helping in clarity and writing, a whole host of things. One of the ways that I think about AI with the agency is that there are basically two types of intelligence failures. There's the failure to collect and the failure to properly analyze what you have. So on the analytic side, I think what AI promises for the agency is to reduce the likelihood that we don't properly analyze the vast holdings that we have, to connect the dots between different pieces of intelligence that we may have, or to think about the intelligence that we have in new and innovative ways.
And those holdings are only getting vaster and vaster as months and days go by, right?
I mean, think about it. The agency and the IC as a whole has an enormous comparative advantage over basically everybody else in the world. Because what we can do is, on the one hand, make use of AI models that are created in the open source, the latest, greatest frontier models. The agency can bring those inside the perimeter and make use of them, and that work is ongoing. But the other piece of it is we have this incredibly vast and unique data holding.
Right.
You train up a model on the data that the IC has and combine that with the models that everybody else has access to, you have a comparative advantage. And there's work underway to figure out how to make use of the holdings that the agency has, that the IC has, to sort of enhance the quality of the AI, the generative AI tools that are available.
There are some who hear that and they kind of begin to think of some Orwellian uses for AI that the IC might be engaged in. Do you think the privacy and civil liberties risks can be managed?
I do, and I think it needs to be managed. Our AI strategy when we were there, and I assume it has carried through, had basically three elements to it. It was, how do we use AI to help the agency do its business? How do we understand what our adversaries are doing with AI? And the third part was governance, making sure that we are using AI in a way that is consistent with the laws, the regulations, and the expectations of the American people and how the agency would operate. And that third piece is incredibly important. And it's a challenge. it's a new technology, trying to figure out how to bring that into use in the agency in a way that remains consistent with the restrictions over how we use U.S. person data, for instance. But it's something that we were very focused on.
Yeah, I think all three legs of that stool are probably critical.
Yeah.
Let's pivot for a moment, just talk a little bit or get your thoughts. This is an unclassified
Yeah.
environment, obviously, so within restrictions on classification. But what is your appreciation for how our adversaries are using AI or some of these other advanced technologies against us? And maybe from that we could talk a little bit about what the future of human collection is even going to look like.
Yeah. So look, I think we are aware that our adversaries are using AI in a variety of different ways to challenge us. We were talking earlier about the great state rivalry between the U.S. and the PRC. You can look at what China is doing with AI, and understand that it is not just for commercial use, that they are using AI to assist in their weapons development practices. They're using AI basically on a whole host of new technologies, whether it's cyber, biotech, sort of go down the list. We can see how the Chinese government is making use through their civil-military fusion of the developments in AI, and they're pushing very, very hard to overtake the U.S. in the sort of the latest and greatest in AI technology, in generative AI in particular, and that is in part because they're competing with us economically. They're competing with us around the world to have their AI stack adopted by countries around the world, but they're also using AI for their military and intelligence purposes.
Yeah, and disinformation, and you mentioned the cyber.
Right, and we've seen it's I think well known that the Chinese have a very, very aggressive offensive cyber capability. They've been stealing IP from American companies for years. We've seen in recent years both the Volt Typhoon and the Salt Typhoon intrusions by the Chinese.
These are code words given to discrete Chinese hacking attempts, some of which were to embed tools and capabilities on our cell phone service. Others were actually hacking data from government servers. And
and pre-positioning in various ways. I think you can assume that the Chinese are including AI capabilities, at least in their planning for cyber activities.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the world of humans and human operations.
Yeah.
When I was in service until I retired a couple of years ago, we were just kind of beginning to appreciate and try to take steps to mitigate what we've called ubiquitous technical surveillance, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to act with anonymity in today's world. I mean, everything is online, everything is digitized.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to be a case officer and act covertly, it's much more challenging. What do you see as the future of espionage?
So you're exactly right. I mean, the old model of humans where you could have a fake document, travel overseas, figure out whether you've got trailing surveillance and go off and meet your asset is a thing of the past largely, because of the what you described as ubiquitous technical surveillance. Whether it's your cell phone in your pocket, the cameras on the street corner, the whole variety of ways in which it is very hard to as we describe in the business, to get black, to not be followed. So what does that mean? Does that mean that humans is dead? No. The human remains a core element of our intelligence collection approach, and human will continue to provide insight that no other can provide. So how do you go about human in a world where you have this ubiquitous technical surveillance? Part of it is to use technology against itself, to not try to make yourself invisible, but to operate in an environment where there is technical surveillance in a way that is not alerting, and the agency has been focused on that. There are also technologies that can be used that change the way that the tradecraft is exercised. I mean, so one of the things that actually began when I was in the agency the first time and has continued through is a dedicated effort within the Directorate of Operations to think about how we can operate in a world where there is ubiquitous technical surveillance. And that means, in part, turning the technology against itself, finding ways not to be alerting in the data, and also ways to approach the process of assessing, developing, recruiting, and running assets that doesn't involve as much physical contact as in physical activity as we had previously engaged in. All of which is can be alerting in this world where everything is being observed.
I mean, one thought that occurred to us is, again, when I was in service, targeting was a big aspect of the human collection mission, where you first have to identify, well, who are the people that have the data or the access that you need. And a lot of that in the old model was sort of who you met, who you could physically get next to. But with big data and with AI, you can probably kind of cut through a lot of that information much more rapidly and at scale using these technologies.
Well, for sure. I think there's targeting and there's also recruiting. I mean, I think you can use big data to hone the way that you go about. Once you've targeted an individual who has access, may have some predisposition to wanting to potentially be recruited, to hone the recruitment using AI, using other technologies in a way that you can both be more effective on the individual you're going after and also scale in a way that was more difficult previously.
And also protecting our human assets, right? Those people from foreign countries who choose to go into a clandestine relationship with the CIA at some risk to themselves, having AI tools available to monitor their online activities or whether people are monitoring them would be useful.
I would say the one other there are many other actually aspects of the human mission that have been affected by technology, but one area where I think is interesting is it's not just sort of tech-enabled human, which we've been talking about, but it's also human-enabled technology collection, right? So again, back to the old model of a case officer meeting a human asset and talking to him or her about what they have observed. That is still important. That is still something that we do. But if you sort of think about I'm sure there are multiple movies where what you want is that piece of paper in the drawer that's in the in the file that is that you need your asset to go and get. Well, the paper in the file of is now a file on a computer server somewhere, and so the human mission is also human-enabled tech collection. What we need to do is collect information in different ways. It's no longer getting the piece of paper, it's getting the computer file. And so evolving our human mission, I think, to recognize that there's not just tech-enabled human activity, there's also human-enabled tech collection is an important aspect of what we're doing going forward.
So it strikes me that there's a lot of opportunity for CIA and the IC to be availing themselves of these cutting-edge technologies. But unlike decades in the past where we were inventing the U2 or we were inventing satellite technology in-house. That's now all happening in the private sector. I mean, we have people.
Not all.
But a large extent with
shout
AI.
Out, little shout out to DS&T and the DDI.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
But, synthetic bio, you think about some of these other technologies, a lot of that is happening elsewhere, outside. And so how do you see the agency is positioned to take advantage of what our private sector knows about what is the cutting edge of these technologies sort of in and of itself, but also what foreign adversaries are doing in these industries?
Yeah. So I think as I mentioned earlier, one of the changes that Director Burns and I instituted was the creation of this new technology center, the Transnational Technology and Mission Center, T2MC. One of its principal missions was to improve our relationship with the private sector, to be strategic in how we engage with the domestic private sector. But we do develop partnerships with companies that are at the cutting edge of a variety of technological developments, whether it's semiconductors or advanced computing or power, thinking about ways to do new batteries or new power generation sources. The importance of that is that it helps us both identify technologies that can be useful to the agency in going about doing the agency's work, but they're also out in the world. They see what their competitors are doing overseas. They can help us understand what the Chinese company or the Russian company is doing in the same space, just to help us with our mission of understanding what our adversaries are doing. Yeah. And so that partnership with the private sector is incredibly important. It has been, a part of the agency's, DNA from its founding, but it's something that is, I think, even more so an important part of how the agency is going to stay fresh in technology going forward. We've had a long time relationship with In-Q-Tel, which is a venture capital firm that helps identify technologies that have both commercial and intelligence applications. That continues to be a very, very valuable way for the agency also to have insight into what's happening in the private sector.
So here at SESP, we've done a fair amount of writing and thinking about incorporating AI, quantum, some of these other technologies. And everywhere that I go and talk to people on the Hill or even people in the community, sort of the repeated refrain of need to go faster. You need to be adopting these technologies at a quicker pace than maybe what some of our current processes and culture sort of allow for. What is it that, how do you appreciate that issue? And what do you think we should be doing?
I think it's 100% right. We have to go faster. We were going faster, and I think there's still more to be done on that. Look, the importance of technology to our national security, I think, can't be overstated. It is both an accelerant to everything that we have cared about for a long time, and it is, as I mentioned earlier, a domain unto itself. It's a domain of competition. It's a domain of the projection of national power. And the agency in its role as helping to inform the policy community, the president, indications and warnings of adversary capabilities. Right. Adversary capabilities in technology is an important part of that. Right. And our ability to do that as an agency, as an intelligence community, it depends in significant part on the talent that we continue to attract. So there's a human aspect of this, as well as the technology that we give to those humans to do their job. And the speed of technological development demands that the agency bring on board technology, at the pace of business, and that means bringing it on more quickly than we have historically.
Yeah. So you brought up humans as a part of this, and in my tenure at CIA, I was always impressed by the flexibility and the resiliency of the workforce.
Yep.
I mean, I lived through the galvanizing changes of 9/11, and people just were hard chargers, ready to quit what they were doing and pivot to work on CT.
Yep.
But how do you think about the future of the IC workforce, specifically at CIA? What needs to change, and are there some new ideas that we should be thinking about to bring in some of this technical know-how into the workforce, into the agency?
Yeah. Look, I think we need to continue to recruit, develop, and retain this incredibly talented workforce. Technologists are increasingly important, but it's a big agency. There is room for folks who are not technologists as well to help do the business of the CIA and of the intelligence community more broadly. There remain, in the agency, huge numbers of incredibly talented, dedicated public servants who are ready to help train the next generation of intelligence professionals. And, so if folks are watching this podcast, are thinking about joining the IC, I would encourage them to do so. They are needed. With all this talk of technology, which is all entirely right, none of it makes any difference if you don't have good people there to operate the machinery. I would encourage folks to go into public service. It is incredibly rewarding, and in the world that we are facing today and over the next decade, quarter century, having a intelligence community that is composed of talented, dedicated, patriotic people is going to be ever more important. I would say, and I think it would be dishonest and a disservice to the folks who are there serving today if I didn't mention that I am deeply worried about some of the things that have gone on, some of the arbitrary and I think politically driven firings of agency officers and others in the IC and really and across government. I think it is highly regrettable. These are dedicated, patriotic, hardworking civil servants who deserve better. My former boss, Bill Burns, recently wrote about, I think he called it a war on public service and expertise. I hope that ends. It should end. We've been through, times like this before, and we have, I think, continued to attract good people to go into public service and good people to go into the IC and good people to go into the CIA. And I just reiterate, I think it's important that people continue to sign up to serve because it's an important mission and one that is also incredibly rewarding and incredibly important to our country.
Yeah, that was my experience. Is the entire time I was there for 3 decades, a very apolitical organization.
Yeah.
Right? There to support whoever is in the Oval Office. Yeah.
And I think that's, for, the vast majority of agency officers, the turbulence at the, at the top has no impact on their lives. They've got a job to do. It's an important job to do, and they get that job done.
So I'm glad to hear that you're still recommending that young people think about a career in intelligence. I know you're teaching currently up at Yale University.
Yeah.
If you had to kind of offer one or two pieces of advice to a young person who's thinking about applying to CIA or applying to a job in the intelligence community, what are some skills or experiences that they ought to be thinking about acquiring before they submit their paperwork?
So, I mean, clearly some facility understanding of technology is important. You do not need to be, the leading AI expert in the world to get hired in the IC or at the CIA. But understanding technology, understanding how technology intersects with the national security effort is, I think, important. It's not essential. The agency hires vast array of people into a vast array of jobs. But I think that's important. The other is just, I think, to demonstrate curiosity. One of the tremendous things about working in the intelligence community, working at CIA, is that you get exposed to so many interesting things, and you have the opportunity to learn about the world that we live in a way that you really can't in any other profession. And I think what the agency looks for in its hiring are people who are prepared to take advantage of that opportunity. So I think what the agency is looking for and what people ought to do to make themselves an attractive candidate is to do well and show that you have the capacity and the predilection to learn and to contribute. And that's what the agency is looking for.
Okay. Well, that's, I think, a perfect note to end on.
Great.
David Cohen, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Chip, my pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.